Brownbag on his trip to, as a black person, evaluating the black scene in Eastern Oregon.
Oh, wow.
So hopefully we get that sometime soon. And also check our website, because Dawn is trying to have at least one artist per month, and usually the third Tuesday. She doesn't have anything for February, but I know she has March and April. So.
Which is, are those at noon or at night?
Pardon?
The artist.
Oh, it's at noon. Yeah, they're regular Brownbags. Yeah. See, I keep dawdling around, and Ralph and Janet made it. That's what.
Thank you for waiting.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have Dick here doing this. Dick in Rotary for several years, and I think when he was the Rotary president, Rotary has this deal where you get to have your presidential project, and Dick decided that we needed some help in this area in the county and launched Project Heartbeat. He has worked himself to fund this thing with grants, and now he has 111 machines in Wallowa County, which is pretty incredible. And he has just kept this thing going and kept it going. And one of my little wanna-dos and make sure I get done is to make damn sure that this program continues. You know, whether it's Rotary and Seroptimist or whoever that's in the hospital and the clinics, that we figure out a way to make sure that we don't have to rely on a volunteer who's as old as I am.
Or older.
Or maybe older, but he's in better shape. Look at him, God almighty. Anyway, so we wanted him to just do this program not to teach us how to use the machines, but to tell us about the program here in the county. And he has volunteered again on March 21st. He'll do a 2-hour session so that for our staff and other people here, so that we will at least have the basics of making things work. So please welcome my friend Dick Burch.
Thanks, Rich. You know, I don't like to stand behind a lectern because it provides distance, but I've got a few things. I want to be sure that I don't skip anything that's really relevant and important. But first, before I talk about Project Heartbeat, there are a few other things that I should talk about before. It gives you a little bit of background about why I started Project Heartbeat. And be talking a little bit about cardiac issues, emergency cardiac issues, and primarily out of hospital from a first aid standpoint or a first responder standpoint. Talk about the difference between a heart attack and sudden cardiac arrest, because a lot of people don't really understand clearly what the difference is. Talk a little bit about what happens in the county, and I'll get into some detail about why I started Project Heartbeat and what our situation is in Wallowa County. I will conclude at the end of the presentation with a video that's a very interesting video that I usually show in most of my first aid CPR classes that shows an actual response with a very good outcome of a 17-year-old high school girl. And it's pretty unusual. Of course, here's a little over a month ago at a football game where millions of people were watching this football game, and they see a football player make a tackle and moments later collapses. He is clinically dead when he hits the turf at that point. And fortunately, both college and professional teams have trainers that are fully trained, along with physicians, team physicians, for football, for professional football. But he was not really awake, but he was technically alive. But the whole issue of when someone becomes clinically dead with their heart stops beating, the whole point is, and that's one of the things I'll talk about today. First, and sometimes that pain radiates up into the shoulder. The paramedic in charge, they deal with that on a regular basis when there's a refusal for either treatment or transport. And the only time that someone will be charged for a transport to our fantastic hospital is when they either provide medications or they transport. So, but they'll ask for a release. So they'll ask you to sign a release. But is in what is called fibrillation. And the fibrillation is just, it's in spasm, and it's not an effective heart pump at that point. And that's what you really need, is you need to have continually oxygen going to the brain and the heart and all of the body, really, for that matter. One thing that's really important in any arrest, and it's called full arrest if it's dealing with a heart issue, abbreviated SCA. And if you've ever been in a hospital, you may have heard code blue in the ER. And code blue is the common term that's used to say, we've got a sudden cardiac arrest in the emergency room. And that's when you see the code blue team, usually physicians and RNs and others, making a beeline because seconds count at that point. When the heart stops beating as a result of sudden cardiac arrest, or that's usually why the heart stops beating, because of cardiac arrest, the victim loses 10% survivability for every minute that passes. Think about that. So if the person's heart is not beating, generally it's acknowledged for 10 to 12 minutes, there's very little likelihood that that victim or patient is going to be successfully resuscitated. Wow. That's why I try to emphasize seconds count. It's really important that the response is very, very quick. When we think about, it's fantastic. When Carol and I first moved here, we noticed that, boy, that looks like a pretty old hospital. And so we began to ask people, what's healthcare like here? As we're evaluating Wallowa County as a place to settle. After I retired, we moved into a large motorhome, a bus conversion, and traveled full-time for about 7 years, looking for that ideal place to settle. Wallowa County seemed to be that, but we wanted to be a little older. We want to have good access to good health care. Well, they said, well, we've got some good doctors, we've got the state, and I got a couple of recommendations. Well, it's probably really important that you take a membership in LifeFlight. Oh, really? Yeah, because we don't have many specialists here. So if you've got any complicated medical issues, you're going to be taking a helicopter or a fixed wing airplane ride. And that's what's really important, and that still happens, although we now have an incredible hospital. We are so lucky to have the hospital, and we have a great EMS. But when you talk about the time involved and the time constraints and how important time is in time, generally what we say is within 6 to 8 minutes. If you don't, the likelihood of survival begins to decline rapidly. There's some things that you can do. One is good quality, high quality CPR, and it's changed over the years. I did a program for Rotary. I don't know if you were shocked by an AED, even this portable unit here. So here I am faced with, okay, how much do they cost? Well, at the time they cost $1,700 was a retail cost. And it was very unusual for you to get a discount from that. Wow, that's a lot of money. So I set a goal, what I felt was a realistic goal. Okay, well, that sounds reasonable. So all I need to do is, one, decide where to put them. However, I'll talk to you about on the way. A little bit of a delay there. So, and there was a great deal of interest from a lot of people. I remember at the dinner and dance, and I don't know if the two of you were at the table, there was a table with physicians sitting around it. And I thought, that's fantastic. I've got the doctors in the county that are supporting the program. And, you know, it drew a lot of attention, and I spent just a fair amount of time trying to organize, but I had a lot of help initially from a committee when we first kicked it off. But I remember fundraising for me. I remember when I was 12 years old, had a paper route. One of the worst things about that, I loved to throw papers because we threw them. It was in the hills of Los Angeles. I know, that's where I grew up. Don't hold that against me. Collect at the end of the month and to get new subs or people experiencing a systemic or whole body allergic reaction. When it costs them, an estimate, probably $20 to manufacture a drug. Okay, where we go from here with Project Heartbeat is a bit of a challenge because pandemic, you've heard all about the computer chip shortages. Most of them, those chips coming out of Asian countries, mostly China and Taiwan. And guess what? This little device is a very sophisticated computer with many computer chips in it because it has the ability, when you put the pads on, as you may see on the mannequin over there, it will make a determination of whether or not this is a shockable rhythm. And it looks for two irregular, life-threatening rhythms, and those are the only two rhythms that can be shocked back to a normal, what is called a normal sinus rhythm. And it's a pretty remarkable device. When you use it, it analyzes the heart rhythm. It determines, is this a shockable rhythm? The two shockable rhythms, and this will be in the test, is ventricular fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia. Ventricular fibrillation is when I describe that spasming, and the heart in both cases is not pumping adequately to get oxygenated blood to all of the organs. But it can tell what it is. And if it finds one of those two shockable rhythms, it'll say shock advised, and you press the button. So this talks you through the whole response. Really liked compression, and that's one of the things that most people will do is a very shallow compression because they don't want to hurt anyone. Well, folks, let me tell you, they are clinically dead at that point. And even if you press too hard and you crack or break a rib, ribs heal. I know of only one individual who has come back from the dead. So that's the whole object of an automated external defibrillator. Everyone saw how many did not see Damar Hamlin collapse on the field? Okay, well, only one.
And Loganville Christian has 3 stationary AEDs and 2 travel ones that go with their sports teams. They were all paid for with grants. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta's Project Save trains schools in how to respond to emergencies just like this one. And on Friday, Project Save is holding a drill day. They're asking schools to practice their emergency action plans so that they know what to do just in case. Because Tom and Sinead, this was like a perfect storm. Everything was carefully coordinated. They had the AED, they had the training, they knew what to do. They practiced it enough that when it happened, it was like rote.
Everybody
Just
jumped
did
into
what they
action.
knew to do.
Yeah. It's a reminder to all of us to practice and, make sure that it's...
Also to look around. Where is the AED
Right.
around me at the gym? Where is it at school? Ask.
More so for high schools, Beth, than like elementary and middle school?
Well, they're training all schools, and they're trying to build teams of administrators in those schools and teachers who, like 5 to 10 people who can respond when they have a drill like this. Because seconds matter, minutes matter,
Sure they
you've
do.
got to respond quickly.
Yeah. Glad they did in that case.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Beth.
Well, what do you think?
Pretty impressive.
To me, that is a very important teaching tool for my classes. And you notice that it was the same model that they had at the school. But that's one of the things I didn't mention is it was very important to me to place AEDs at the schools. It's one thing for someone my age who's had a chance to live a full life to succumb to sudden cardiac arrest. But it's unacceptable in my mind for a child to die if there's an alternative. And the alternative is what you saw. This school saved Claire's life because one is they got AEDs and they trained. Did you hear the Code Blue team practiced so many times a year? Well, I've had a chance to, first, at each of the public schools that we have here, they have 4 or 5 AEDs. One is stationary, and you may have seen that if you've gone to any of the sporting events, and the others are available on buses or where sports teams play away from the school, so that the coaches, and hopefully the coaches treat the AED just like any other sporting equipment. It's unlikely that it's going to happen, that a young person, but we lose 6,000 to 8,000 children a year in the United States from sudden cardiac arrest. And to me, that's unacceptable. In this particular case, Claire had a congenital heart defect that had never been diagnosed. However, someone going into sudden cardiac arrest, it can also occur from a blunt trauma blow to the chest, which is what I think happened to Damar Hamlin. Also, other trauma, forms of trauma, especially shock. When someone dies from hypovolemic shock, which is loss of too much blood, when they go into shock, and it's actually sudden cardiac arrest that will kill them. In the United States, there are about 475,000, almost 500,000 cases of sudden cardiac arrest in the country every year. So one of the largest, and I want to read something. Sudden cardiac arrest claims more lives than colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, influenza, pneumonia, auto accidents, HIV, firearms, and house fires combined. It's one of the largest causes of death. So again, where do we go from here? Obviously, the AEDs that are placed require some support. So I have all of the AEDs in my database, so I know that the 5-year shelf life of the batteries and the pads will be replaced in a timely way. And Vanessa Phillips here helping me. Thank you so much, Vanessa. That's fantastic. Because it takes a lot of effort to continue to keep these things going. I have made offers to the school administrations that if you want to set up an emergency response plan, I would be happy to help you put it together. After I show them this video, and unfortunately I haven't had the favorable response. No one has yet asked me to help them. But hopefully they have prepared. They all have their teachers and coaches. A certain number of them, all the coaches and certain teachers have to be certified, currently certified in CPR and AED. And many years ago, after AEDs were developed and they became these portable units that you see now, it's still a little bit expensive. All of a sudden, we had much better tools in order to successfully resuscitate people that had a cardiac emergency. Any questions?
How long does it take the ambulance to get to Joseph?
Well, I know in a couple of instances, Carol was there, but medical emergencies, and it was over 20 minutes. And that's probably what you can expect. Even in Enterprise, it's probably 10 to 12 minutes. As I mentioned, in the Imnaha area, and that's why I started the program down there, it's a long, long time. So those Imnaha responders are going to be on their own for a while, although the helicopter will probably take about 20 minutes to get there from LeGrand. But we're covered, and I always talk about in my first aid classes, I strongly encourage people to get a membership with Life Flight. They do an excellent job, and we have Life Flight helicopters in LeGrand, Lewiston, Idaho, Walla Walla, and Pendleton.
Well, Dick, what we depend on in Joseph, or in Wallowa, I'm sure, is the fire department they've got portable AEDs, and they have people trained at a certain level to get there. They're likely to get there first within 2 or 3 minutes in the town of Joseph, and then the ambulance comes.
And that's a relatively new development, and thanks for bringing that up, Rich.
Yeah.
When I first started this, I approached the Joseph Fire Department and I said, do you have any AEDs? No, we don't. Well, you really ought to have an AED on one of your response vehicles. Oh, well, we don't do medical responses. That's all changed.
Oh, sure.
That is all changed. We now have, Wallowa has had EMTs for quite some time, Wallowa Volunteer Fire Department. And they have an ambulance down there. And Joseph and Enterprise both have EMRs, emergency medical responders, which are trained. And yes, you're right. They're generally going to be the first ones. And I have a radio, the same radio. We use the same radios that EMS uses for the Imnaha responders. And I have one of those at home. And if I hear an ambulance come in, I'll turn it on, turn the radio on, just kind of listen. And so I get a very good confirmation that Joseph Fire Department, your volunteer fire department here in Joseph, is responding to a medical call.
Yeah, my grandson's on the volunteer department now, and they're having a training once a week. They're doing trainings at their meetings, and he said that I think it's 75% of their calls are medical.
Yep.
So they're going to try to get all medically certified.
And that's what's typical of a fire department. Most of the calls are medical calls.
Yeah.
And that's most of the fire departments around the country. Not all volunteer fire departments, but more volunteer fire departments are getting medical capability, which is really important. But you know what the response was from and I'm not going to mention who was fire chief. When I first started the program 14 years ago, his response, well, we don't do medical calls. And I said, well, you know who's the most likely to collapse from sudden cardiac arrest? One of you guys at a fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ralph.
So if I didn't know better, I would think you had a significant background. But I didn't know better, so why don't you tell me?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'd like to say, well, you know, I'm a retired flight surgeon from the Navy. No, I'm retired from the Navy. I'm also retired from the Bureau of Land Management. But I was trained as a first responder when I was working for BLM in Roseburg. And we had a big need to have people trained in more advanced first aid because of the number of accidents and incidents that we had in the field, as you might understand. And I really liked the idea of being able to know what to do to help someone having a medical emergency. And so when I came to Wallowa County, and it was, a couple of you know, maybe many of you know Jerry Perrin, who was Mr. Red Cross. Yeah. He was the volunteer director of the Red Cross chapter when we had a Red Cross chapter. And I asked him, I said, at a Rotary meeting, hey Jerry, do you offer, I'd like to get my first responder certificate renewed. And he said, well, we don't offer those advanced courses like that, but we have lay responder courses, but we're short of trainers. Would you? And no one should ask me, would you help with this? Because it's difficult for me to say no. Right, dear?
Yes, and I always say no. It's not a naughty word.
Yeah. It's been very rewarding for me, and yeah, I spent a lot of time with Project Heartbeat. You know, someone asked me not too long ago, well, how many hours a week do you spend? And I don't know, it's maybe 40 or 50 hours a week, but I decided against the advice of Rich Wanschneider and other people to pay myself a salary as the director of a nonprofit. And I'm sorry, I just can't, because all of the dollars have to go into AEDs in the community or providing training.
So Dick, do other hospitals, does Grand Ronde Hospital, for instance, do they have a program that operates a similar thing out of the hospital?
I don't think so.
No.
There are not that many. As a matter of fact, I haven't found yet in my Googling another project like that where it's just an independent nonprofit that is placing AEDs in the community. I'm sure there are some.
Well, Brad, do you know if are hospitals starting to pick this up now?
Well, I've been away from the hospital a while, but no, I don't think so.
Wow.
Some hospitals do, but one of the challenges is, you know, placing AEDs around. You have to ensure or try to ensure that people are going to be trained responders associated with those. However, I have some AEDs that are placed where people are not currently certified. However, if there's a large group, say in Cloverleaf Hall at a big event, there's going to be at least one and probably several people who are trained to respond. And the AED is in the wall cabinet. It's very apparent. It's got a sign there, and they'll immediately go over there and they'll know what to do. They'll call 911 and get the AED, start CPR immediately. And
Well, some of us took your course 10 years ago, 12 years ago. It's been a while. And so a refresher course would be great.
yeah, and the course that Anna's talking about is one of the things that I do is I offer free training. Woo! However, this free training focuses on compression-only CPR and the use of AEDs. But the compression, and that's really a very important part of it. It doesn't result in certification, but it covers the most important aspects of responding to someone who's gone into sudden cardiac arrest, who collapses. If they collapse and they're not breathing, they need CPR and they need an AED. So, and bringing up the issue is I have a couple of sheets up here. One is if you're interested in attending the free course, we're going to have the free course here on March 21st. Is that correct?
All right, 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. And
We're going to reach out to Seroptimus and we'll allow resources, Brad, and see if there are AEDs in the old hospital that will allow resources,
Yeah, there
aren't
is.
there?
Oh, yeah.
And ours is right, whoops, you can't can't see it from here, but it's right
We-
on the
yeah, we-
corner of
There's
the
one
corner
right
of
on
the
the
kitchen.
corner.
And do you know whether, well, Carol says that there's one at Oddfellows upstairs.
You don't know where it is? You walk past it every time you go.
You just go up the stairs and before you go up the first landing, and it's right in front of you, right there on the wall.
That's because Janet goes in there every day too.
No, there's not, but
Well,
it's
we ought to have a
upstairs.
reminder, that we gotta do a
It's
quiz.
right there, as you go in the front
Yeah, I know
door
where it
of the
is.
building.
I've seen it on the wall.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's for upstairs and downstairs.
yeah, that's for both. But,
Okay.
you know, and the free classes are good, and I'll continue to offer those and teach those whenever I have an opportunity. I like to do those, but if someone wants to get the full first aid CPR AED training with certification for 2 years, I have a sign-up sheet. I have a couple of dates that I've set up. One, the earliest is February 17th, and it will be in the Walala Resources building, the old hospital, which is where my office is. And I have access, because I pay rent for my office, I have access to a very nice conference room right across the hall.
How many classes do you give a year in first aid?
Oh boy, I don't know. Well, when you consider, I don't know, a couple dozen or more, I guess. The big focus, COVID really affected that because I wasn't teaching during COVID, except very limited for special requests with masks and so forth. And a lot of people just didn't want to go to a first aid class with COVID the way it was. But my biggest effort has been in the last couple of years with the NAHA responders. And Ralph mentions also, Ralph, how many was it? 5, 6, 7 years ago, comes to me and said, Dick, I would like for you to evaluate the first aid kits on the Eagle Cap excursion training. Okay, sure. Yeah, you get a free trip. Oh, fantastic. And a free lunch. Wow, that's cool. So I looked at the first aid classes, first aid kits that were on the train. And here I'm going down into this very remote canyon. And we had, I think, about 150 people on board, many of them elderly, many children, and people struggling to go up and down the stairs. And I'm thinking, first aid kits, well, so about a 2.5 page report. I recommended that there be we ought to have a first responder, someone trained in advanced first aid on every trip. And so we've been doing that now for 5 years or so, I think. And what I try to do is I try to get off-duty EMTs or registered nurses that would like a free trip. The incentive is they can bring a guest, and so the guest gets a free trip. But we have pretty much all the medical equipment and supplies that you might need for any level of medical emergency on board the train. That's pretty important because the access for an emergency vehicle, an ambulance, would be very difficult. I've made arrangements with Life Flight that we work with Life Flight for them to respond if we have to transport someone. Fortunately, we've not had any serious medical emergencies, but we have wasps on the train. Someone could go anaphylactic with a very severe allergic reaction as a result of a bee sting, and we've had bee stings. Fortunately, none of them have been really serious.
Can I ask you to see the future a bit? Where do you see Project Heartbeat in 50 years? I mean,
Okay, a very good question. One of the dilemmas with a project like Project Heartbeat is 70% of the cases of sudden cardiac arrest occur in the home. So when I was faced with that, I thought, wow, could it be that AEDs would be very similar to smoke detectors in every home? Well, these now sell for $1,800, and I can't get them any cheaper than that because they don't have any factory recertified units. And right now I've got 5 on order, and it'll take 6 to 8 weeks to get those. So Where it's gonna be, I don't know. I think that potentially someone's gonna come along and suggest maybe they ought to be a little bit cheaper than they are, because they certainly don't cost $1,800 to manufacture. They're not that expensive to manufacture. I don't know how much they cost. No one would tell me if I asked. But it's a very good question. I really don't know. But, you know, with lifestyles the way they are, I think the incidence of sudden cardiac arrest is going to continue to increase, especially as the population increases.
And our weight increases.
Yeah, and our weight increases. But I have a display over there to answer the one question that no one's asked. Where are all the AEDs?
I was gonna ask, but I was gonna tell
So
you.
I have a map over there, and I've spent many, many laborious hours putting dots, red dots on the map that'll show you where the AEDs are, if you're curious.
So it's after 1 o'clock, but before you leave, go over and memorize. Or take a picture. There you go. See this younger generation?
Yeah,
They don't have
yeah.
to memorize anything. We used to have to memorize stuff. Now they just take a picture.
And when you get to my situation, forget memorizing. Memory goes south.
Share that way though, too.
Course.
But there is more information over there, some handouts, and also, but you're going to be able to use the latest of the mannequins that provide you instant feedback on how well you're doing the chest compressions.
And by that time, we'll all know where the machines are in the Oddfellows Hall. I can
Yes,
see it. There's
yes,
some